If you've been following my channel lately, or the audio industry in general, you're probably familiar with the idea of spatial audio, audio that surrounds you in all directions. How do you actually represent and mix sound in a full 3D space, though? Well, there's a few ways, and the method we're going to talk about today is Ambisonics. If you want more background on spatial audio, I have a whole video on the subject, but I want to quickly touch on a couple things from that video. Traditionally, the way to represent sound in space is to pan sound between a certain number of channels. For example, 2 channels for stereo or 5 main channels for 5.1. The sound's spatial information is represented by the relative level of that sound in each channel. This is channel-based audio. In the past decade or so, we've also seen the emergence of object-based audio. One example is Dolby Atmos, which uses up to 128 individual audio tracks in both channel and object-based formats. With object-based audio, rather than each track being tied to a specific channel layout like stereo or 5.1, the track contains metadata which describes its location in 3D space and even allows the object to move around. Ambisonics uses a completely different method based on sound field synthesis, and it's actually older than object-based surround and just as old as early quadraphonic surround systems, which also means it's conveniently not restricted by any trademarks or patents. The idea of Ambisonics starts with midside. I have a whole video on midside, but the basic idea is that you can use a matrix to represent sound in a different way. Rather than storing audio as a left and right signal, midside stores it as a middle and a side signal, then uses a matrix to process that back to left and right. Ambisonics takes that basic idea and turns it up to 11. The most basic form of Ambisonics is first order, which uses 4 channels to represent sound from all directions. The W channel represents sound from all directions, the X channel represents sound from the front and the back, the Y channel represents left and right, and the Z represents up and down. This method of representing spatial information has a few advantages. First, the audio isn't tied to any specific channel-based format, but you can easily decode the audio to any format imaginable, all the way from binaural to mono up to huge surround sound arrays. The other big advantage is that you can easily manipulate the sound information. For example, if you wanted to rotate or even flip the audio, you could. The downside is that, at least with first-order Ambisonics, it's not very accurate at representing spatial information. If you think about it, only 4 channels to represent an entire 3D space is not a lot. Fortunately, higher-order Ambisonics exists. Ambisonics uses 9 channels, or sometimes 8 in certain implementations, and third-order Ambisonics uses 16. You can have any level you want, just cube the order number and add 1, and that's how many channels that order uses. Higher order Ambisonics still uses 1 omnidirectional channel to represent all of the sound, but each order adds more channels to represent different directions, giving you better spatial fidelity. Hopefully all of that has piqued your interest, and if not, here's a reminder. This can all be done for free, and that is not true for other formats like Dolby Atmos, Sony 360, and RO3D. In fact, for that reason, YouTube, Facebook, and a ton of video games use the Ambisonics as their format for virtual reality audio. So, how do you use Ambisonics in your workflow? Well, first, you can record sound with an Ambisonics microphone. One microphone you can use to do so is the Zoom H3 VR, which I've done videos on in the past. It's a fully self-contained recorder that captures audio in first-order Ambisonics. The H3 VR is the most affordable Ambisonics microphone, but of course there are plenty of other mics out there. Rode and Sennheiser both make higher-end first-order microphones, and there are companies like Zilia that make higher-order microphones. All of these microphones capture audio in what's known as A format, which is the raw information from the microphone capsules. In order to actually mix and process the audio, it must be converted to B format. Every microphone out there that I'm aware of comes with software to do that conversion, and the H3 VR can actually do the conversion in the recorder. If you have an Ambisonics recording you want to edit and convert, or you want to mix audio in other formats using Ambisonics, you'll need audio host software and plugins. The host software needs to support multi-channel tracks. Probably the best option is Reaper, as it's super affordable and has great support for Ambisonics mixing. You can also demo it for free if you just want to dip your toes in. There is plenty of other DAWs like Nuendo and Pro Tools that support Ambisonics, but they're a lot more expensive, and honestly, I still prefer Reaper for Ambisonics even though I own Nuendo. Next, you'll need a set of software plugins. Again, there are paid options out there, but there's also a lot of free ones that pretty much do everything you could need. I'll link 2 different free suites below, IEM and O3A, as well as a binaural decoding plugin by Google. We're going to use all of them for this demo. Working with Ambisonics audio involves an encoding and decoding process. Audio in other formats like mono, stereo, and A format must be converted into Ambisonics format, and once it's in that format, it must be decoded on the other end so you can listen to it. I'm going to do a whole video on mixing in Ambisonics, but I want to get the basic stuff across so that you can start on your own projects if you want to. I have a mix of audio here in mono, stereo, H3VR recordings, and a reverb bus that's using a 5.1 reverb. I'm going to use second order Ambisonics for this demo, so I need to set my master bus to have 9 channels. Reaper actually doesn't support odd channels, so I'm actually setting it to 10 channels, but we'll only use 9. Next, I'm going to put the Google Resonance Audio Monitor on my output bus. This will convert the Ambisonics audio into binaural so that it can be listened to on headphones. You can also find decoders that convert to surround sound formats if that's how you prefer to work. I can route my H3VR recording directly to my master bus already because it's in Ambisonics B format. It is only first order, but the first 4 channels of second order Ambisonics are the same as the first order, so my recording will decode properly. It just won't have quite as much spatial detail as the second order recording. If I decide I want to change the orientation of my H3VR recording, all I have to do is slap the O3A panner on it, and then I can pan the audio to get it facing how I want. All of my mono sources need to be encoded in Ambisonics. To do that, I'm going to make a folder track to put them all in. This is basically the same thing as a bus for people who use other programs. On the folder, I'm going to put the IEM multi-encoder, then route each of my child tracks into different channels on the folder track. This routes each mono and stereo track into different inputs on the multi-encoder plugin. I can now open the plugin, set it to second order Ambisonics, and then I can pan all of my sounds around using each of the encoder inputs. I can also create movement with the sounds using automation. The IEM suite also has a stereo encoder that lets you do this with a stereo or mono signal individually, but I prefer to do my sounds all together in one multi-encoder plugin as it saves a little bit of performance. If you want to use any plugins on your audio, it's better to do that processing on the mono or stereo version of the track before you encode. But if you want to process a group of tracks, then you can use the EQ and the compressor that the IEM suite has. O3A also has some good visualizers that let you see where your audio is sitting in the spatial field. To encode my surround sound reverb I'm using, or any surround sound audio you might have, the process is super easy. There are some dedicated encoders for these formats, but I prefer to use multi-encoder. I can just set 6 of the inputs to represent where the speakers would be in a 5.1 system. With everything encoded, routed to the master bus, and decoded there, I'm basically done. If I wanted to, I could replace my binaural decoder with a 5.1 decoder and listen on my surround sound system, or render audio in Ambisonics format to upload to Facebook or YouTube. Every decoder has slightly different tonal qualities that you may need to tweak your mix if you want to decode to a different format than you mixed it with. Both YouTube and Facebook let you download the decoders that they use for that reason. Again, I've got a whole video coming up where I'll go actually through the entire process of doing a full Ambisonics mix and uploading it to YouTube, but hopefully this video is enough to get you started making your own spatial audio content.